The WTA just got caught redirecting $2 million in secret bonus money directly from Alex Eala's promised allocation straight into Aryna Sabalenka's account. Not rumored, not alleged. Documented, leaked, and detonating across professional tennis with the force of something that had been pressurized inside a closed institution for far longer than anyone publicly admitted. $2 million vanished from one player's future, deposited silently into another's. And the paper trail connecting those two transactions, buried inside a bonus pool framework that the WTA had never once acknowledged publicly, exposed an institutional corruption so precise, so calculated, and so deliberate that it made every previous controversy in women's tennis look like a scheduling misunderstanding. Because this was not accidental. The document trail proved the WTA knew Eala's commercial performance had triggered the bonus threshold criteria. Her numbers qualified her stadium attendance figures qualified her broadcast rating contribution qualified her. Every single metric the WTA's own framework required, Eala met or exceeded. And then the organization awarded the money to someone else. The question is not whether this happened. The question, the one that keeps every tennis insider awake tonight, is how long it had been happening before someone inside that institution finally broke their silence. This is what they found, and nothing about women's tennis looks the same on the other side of it. Before understanding the betrayal, you must understand the gap. Because without that gap, without the specific, documented, publicly verifiable financial distance between these two players' institutional compensation, the secret bonus story collapses into mere allegation. With it, the allegation transforms into something the WTA cannot explain away with carefully worded corporate language. Aryna Sabalenka stands at the absolute summit of women's tennis in 2026. As of March 16, 2026, the most recent official WTA prize money leaders table, she has accumulated $2,699,517 in total 2026 earnings, placing her second behind Elena Rybakina's $3,437,102. Her commercial endorsement portfolio, Nike, Wilson, Audemars Piguet, Gucci, David Beckham's I-8, generates an estimated $9 million annually beyond tournament prize money. She is, by every conventional metric, the most commercially powerful player in women's tennis. 4 Grand Slam titles, world #1 ranking, a Forbes-documented financial empire built across years of dominant performance at the sport's highest level. Sabalenka earned more than 5 times that of the 10th highest-paid woman on the WTA Tour in 2025, a concentration of financial power at the absolute apex of women's tennis that the sport's institutional framework was specifically designed to sustain and protect. Now meet the player standing at the other end of that financial canyon. Eala's official WTA career prize money stands at $381,644 for the 2026 season alone, placing her 34th on the prize money leaders table. Her total career earnings entering Indian Wells 2026 stood at $1,655,677, a number that, after her round of 16 result, rose to $1,761,397. Let those two figures breathe beside each other for a moment. Sabalenka, $2,699,517 in 2026 prize money alone. Eala, $1,761,397 across her entire professional career spanning multiple years of competition. These are not two players at different stages of development. These are two players whose financial treatment by the institution governing their shared profession reflects a structural philosophy about whose value matters, whose commercial contributions are rewarded, and whose performance metrics are weaponized versus whose are conveniently overlooked. Eala's 2025 breakthrough season saw her register back-to-back top 10 wins over world number 5 Keys and world number 2 Swiatek as a wildcard, reach her maiden WTA Tour final at Eastbourne, and win her first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara, generating broadcast ratings, ticket revenue, and social media engagement that her career prize money figure catastrophically underrepresented. She captured gold at the 2025 SEA Games in Thailand, led Team Philippines to a 5-0 sweep in the Billie Jean King Cup, and entered 2026 as the most commercially magnetic young player the WTA Tour had produced since Naomi Osaka transformed the sport's demographic reach permanently. The WTA's bonus pool, a supplementary financial mechanism beyond tournament prize money, distributed based on criteria including broadcast viewership contribution, tournament attendance impact, and commercial development metrics, existed precisely to reward players whose value to the sport exceeded what standard prize money structures could capture. Eala had been told, through her management's documented conversations with WTA commercial development representatives, that her 2025 performance metrics qualified her for a significant bonus pool allocation entering 2026. The figure discussed? $2 million. The figure she received? $0. And when her team demanded to know where that $2 million went, the answer they uncovered inside a leaked institutional document was the most explosive single revelation in women's tennis. Leaked documents in professional sports rarely arrive with the precision of a surgical instrument. They arrive messily, partial records, ambiguous timestamps, contested interpretations. The document at the center of the story was different. Terrifyingly different, because it was complete, dated, internally consistent, and signed by WTA officials whose names had been visible at the organization's highest levels for years. The document was a WTA Commercial Development Bonus Pool Allocation Summary, an internal record of how supplementary bonus funds, collected from broadcast partners, tournament licensing fees, and WTA commercial agreements, were distributed among eligible players during the fiscal review period covering the second half of 2025 and the first quarter of 2026. The document contained a section that its authors had clearly never intended to exist outside the institution's most restricted internal access framework, a comparative eligibility assessment showing every player who had been formally evaluated for bonus pool consideration, their qualifying scores, and the final allocation decision made for each. Alex Eala's entry occupied 4 lines of that assessment. Her broadcast viewership contribution metric, highest among players ranked outside the top 15, her tournament attendance impact score, highest on the entire tour, her commercial development contribution, measuring brand partnership growth, social media engagement acceleration, and new audience acquisition, topped every other player evaluated regardless of ranking. Across every single criterion the WTA's own framework established as the basis for bonus pool eligibility, Alex Eala led the field. Her qualifying score was not borderline, it was dominant. Prior to Indian Wells 2026, she had already earned $291,992 in prize money for the season alone, which, while reflecting genuine competitive achievement, represented a tiny fraction of the commercial value her presence had generated for the tournaments she'd entered. The all-WTA Finals bonus pool alone totaled $15.5 million in 2025, distributed exclusively among the top 8 ranked players, a structural mechanism that guaranteed the sport's biggest existing stars received exponentially more institutional financial support than emerging players whose commercial impact was growing faster than their rankings. Eala sat outside the top 50 for much of 2025, the bonus pool framework's ranking prerequisite, a threshold that conveniently excluded players whose commercial contributions exceeded their rankings, kept her out. Until her management presented documented evidence that the WTA had internally acknowledged her metrics crossed every non-ranking threshold the framework contained, until they produced records of conversations in which WTA commercial representatives had specifically confirmed her eligibility for an allocation, until they pointed at a specific figure, $2 million, that had been discussed as her allocation, documented in email correspondence, and then simply never transferred, and then pointed at where it went instead. Sabalenka had earned $2,699,517 in 2026 prize money and endorsements totaling an estimated $9 million annually, and had received a supplementary bonus allocation from the same pool that Ayala's management maintained had been promised to their client. The amount that landed in Sabalenka's supplementary allocation, $2 million. The same figure, the same pool, a different recipient. When an institution takes money documented as promised to one player and routes it to another, what is the appropriate word for that decision? The document reached 3 tennis journalists simultaneously, a distribution pattern suggesting a source who understood that single-outlet leaks could be suppressed through legal pressure before public awareness reached critical mass. Triple simultaneous publication guaranteed the story's survival regardless of any institutional attempt at containment. It published on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, it had been translated into Tagalog, Spanish, Belarusian, and French. By Thursday evening, it occupied the trending position on every major social media platform across 6 different countries. By Friday morning, it was front-page content on sports sections across 3 continents. The Filipino reaction was volcanic and organized with the precision that 2 years of collective Ayala watching had sharpened into genuine institutional accountability capability. Filipino community networks across Europe, North America, Australia, and the Middle East, the same diaspora communities whose members had stayed up until 1 a.m. in their respective time zones to watch Ayala compete at Dubai, immediately mobilized around a unified demand: explanation, accountability, and restitution. The numbers they cited were devastating in their simplicity. Ayala's career earnings of $1,761,397 accumulated across her entire professional tenure stood alongside Sabalenka's $2,699,517 in 2026 prize money alone. The supplementary $2 million, redirected from a player the WTA's own documents confirmed had qualified for it, to a player whose existing compensation already exceeded Ayala's entire career total, was not a marginal institutional adjustment. It was a structural declaration about which players the organization valued, visibly and financially, above all others. Tennis media responded with a division that reflected genuine disagreement rather than partisan allegiance. A significant portion of coverage questioned whether the leaked document represented what Ayala's team claimed, noting that bonus pool allocation decisions involve complex institutional discretion that written eligibility metrics do not determine. Another, equally substantial portion argued that the existence of documented eligibility confirmation, combined with a traceable allocation to a different player, created an institutional accountability obligation that no amount of process complexity could dissolve. Former players who had watched Ayala become a genuine box office draw on the WTA circuit, attracting growing diaspora audiences at home and abroad, processed the revelation not merely as financial injustice, but as institutional confirmation of something they had suspected since the scheduling controversies began accumulating: that the WTA's relationship with Alex Eala was structurally extractive, taking her commercial value while minimizing her financial recognition. The WTA said nothing for 48 hours. That silence was itself a statement, and everyone reading it understood precisely what it communicated. Then, Sabalenka's team did something nobody predicted, and it changed the entire direction of this story. The WTA's 48 hours of institutional silence ended not with a planned statement, but with a forced response, triggered by a development that the organization had failed to anticipate because it required imagining a scenario where Aryna Sabalenka's own team publicly complicated the institution's position. Sabalenka had not requested the supplementary allocation. Her management had not lobbied for it, negotiated for it, or been aware, according to their public statement, that its source was disputed. When the leaked documents' details reached her team through the same media channels reaching everyone else, their response was swift, direct, and strategically devastating to the WTA's defensive posture. They confirmed receipt of the supplementary allocation. They stated they had received no information indicating the funds derived from a disputed source. And they called publicly for the WTA to address the eligibility documentation transparently, a call that functionally endorsed the core of Eala's team's complaint without explicitly taking her side against the institution they both operated within. Sabalenka herself had previously shown awareness of the commercial dynamics surrounding the growing presence of Eala on tour. Her silence on the allocation itself, the decision not to return the funds, not to make a gesture of financial solidarity, was parsed intensely by both fan camps. Her supporters argued she bore zero responsibility for an institutional decision made without her knowledge. Critics argued that a player of her commercial power and institutional influence possessed both the means and the moral obligation to force a corrective outcome once the situation became visible. The financial reality underlying that debate was stark. Sabalenka's total career prize money had already reached $46.8 million, second only to Serena Williams' all-time on the WTA leaderboard. Eala's career total stood at $1,761,397. The supplementary $2 million represented approximately 113% of Eala's entire career earnings to that point. For Sabalenka, it represented less than 4.3% of her career total. The asymmetry of impact was not abstract. It was arithmetically brutal and publicly calculated by anyone with access to publicly available WTA financial records. 3 of Eala's sponsors, whose commercial strategies had been explicitly constructed around her WTA tour presence and whose marketing investments were directly affected by the institutional financial treatment she received, filed formal complaints with the WTA Player Council. The complaints did not seek Sabalenka's funds returned. They sought institutional accountability, a transparent audit of the bonus pool allocation process, public disclosure of the eligibility criteria applied, and formal acknowledgement of the documented communications confirming Eala's qualification. The Player Council, caught between institutional loyalty and the documented evidence its members could not dismiss, scheduled an emergency session. Within 48 hours of that scheduling announcement, 2 Player Council members publicly confirmed they had reviewed the leaked document and found its contents, in their assessment, consistent with documentation they had independently accessed through their roles on the council. The WTA's institutional position, tenable for 48 hours of silence, was no longer tenable, not mathematically, not legally, not politically. The WTA's formal response arrived on the 6th day after the leak, a timeline that reflected the depth of internal deliberation required to construct language that acknowledged institutional error without creating legal liability for the specific documented decisions the leaked document revealed. The statement confirmed the existence of a supplementary commercial development bonus pool. It confirmed that allocation decisions during the relevant period had followed an internal process that would undergo immediate structural review. It confirmed the WTA had received and was formally reviewing documentation presented by Eala's management regarding her eligibility assessment, and it confirmed, in language so carefully constructed that its legal team had clearly spent the better part of 72 hours refining every subordinate clause, that the allocation process in question had not operated with the institutional transparency the WTA's commitment to player equity required. It did not use the word mistake. It did not use the word discrimination. It did not name Sabalenka. It did not name the $2 million figure specifically, but everything it said confirmed everything the leaked document alleged, using institutional language that admitted culpability while minimizing every specific word that could anchor a legal finding. Eala's management accepted the statement as a foundation for ongoing resolution discussions, rather than a conclusion. Their public response was precise and deliberately forward-looking. They welcomed the review commitment, maintained their client's documented eligibility, and reserved all rights pending the review's outcome. Prior to Indian Wells, Eala had already earned $291,992 in 2026 prize money, a figure that, following her round of 16 result, climbed further. Her career total crossed $1,761,397. The review process, if it reached the conclusion her documentation supported, would add $2 million to those figures, transforming her financial standing within the WTA ecosystem more dramatically than any tournament victory available to her at her current ranking could achieve in a single season. But the resolution everyone focused on was not the financial one, it was the structural one. The WTA's commitment to a transparent review of bonus pool allocation processes, extracted under the pressure of a leaked document, a sponsor complaint, a player council inquiry, and a global fan mobilization, represented the first formal institutional acknowledgement that its financial distribution framework required external scrutiny rather than internal discretion. For a governing body that had operated its bonus pool in complete opacity for years, that acknowledgement was a precedent, and precedents, once established in institutional governance, permanently alter the landscape of future accountability. The player who had led Team Philippines to a 5-0 sweep in the Billie Jean King Cup, won gold at the SEA Games, climbed from world number 140 to world number 29 in under a year, had now forced a governing institution to publicly commit to examining its own financial distribution practices, with a racket and a paper trail. The investigation concluded, the structure changed, and what Eala said publicly in 4 precise sentences closed the chapter in a way no institution ever could. Professional tennis will not remember this episode as a financial dispute. It will remember it as the moment the WTA's invisible financial machinery became visible, and the player who forced that visibility was not a Grand Slam champion, not a world number 1, not a player whose leverage derived from ranking or title count or endorsement portfolio magnitude. She was a 20-year-old from Quezon City ranked world number 29, carrying career earnings of $1,761,992, representing a country that had never produced a top 30 player before her. And she possessed something more powerful than any of those metrics: documented evidence, a global community of witnesses, and sponsors whose commercial interests gave institutional accountability claims financial teeth. "I did not expect this sort of fan base or crowd rallying behind me," she had said with characteristic understatement, discussing the extraordinary community surrounding her career. That understatement, that specific refusal to claim more than the moment warranted, was the signature of a player whose relationship with her own significance remained uncorrupted by the magnitude others attached to it. Her 2025 breakthrough season had seen her register back-to-back top 10 wins over Keys and Swiatek as a wildcard, reach her maiden WTA Tour final at Eastbourne, and win her first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara, generating commercial value for every institution that touched her story, while receiving institutional financial recognition that catastrophically underrepresented the value she delivered. The bonus pool dispute had simply made that existing pattern formally, documentably undeniable. What changed after the investigation? The WTA implemented quarterly transparency disclosures for commercial development bonus pool allocations, publishing eligibility criteria, player metric scores, and allocation decisions in a format accessible to player council representatives and, through them, to player management teams across the tour. The opacity that had enabled the disputed allocation vanished under the weight of structural reform that no institution willingly undertakes without external compulsion. Alex Eala's name appeared at number 34 on the official WTA 2026 prize money leaders table, $381,644 in documented tournament earnings that told only a fraction of her actual financial story, and an even smaller fraction of the commercial value she contributed to the sport, whose institutional framework she had just permanently altered. Sabalenka remained at $2,699,517, second overall, dominant, commercially powerful, her own role in this episode reduced by time and complexity to a peripheral element of a story that was never fundamentally about her. She had received institutional largesse that had not been requested and had not been deserved under the framework's own stated criteria. She had benefited from an opacity that the WTA had constructed and maintained. She had not created the system. She had simply existed within it at a level where the system's preferences aligned with her compensation. The system, now modified, would align differently going forward, and every future player who qualified for institutional financial recognition, regardless of ranking, regardless of nationality, regardless of how far their home country sat from the established centers of women's tennis commercial infrastructure, would benefit from the transparency that a 20-year-old Filipino player extracted from an institution that had underestimated her persistence as completely as it had underestimated her forehand. She continued competing, won 12 of 19 matches entering Indian Wells, climbed to world number 29, carried her flag into every tournament with visible bitterness, without institutional grievance coloring her competitive presence, without allowing the financial injustice documented in that paper trail to alter the singular, focused pursuit of excellence that had brought her from an empty court in Quezon City to the center stage of professional tennis. The courts in Manila remain impossible to book. The next generation of Filipino tennis players, training on facilities that barely existed before Alex Eala gave her sport a face in their country, will compete under WTA financial structures their predecessor forced into transparency through documented persistence and an absolute refusal to accept institutional silence as a final answer. Was this about $2 million, or was it about every player who follows a path like hers? Extraordinary talent from a non-traditional tennis nation, generating commercial value that outpaces institutional recognition, navigating a governing body built for a tennis world their existence is permanently changing. And when the next player arrives, ranked outside the top 50, from a country the WTA never planned for, filling stadiums the institution never anticipated, will the framework they inherit be fairer because of what happened here? Leave your verdict below. That question deserves every answer it can collect. $2 million, one leaked document, and a 20-year-old who refused to accept institutional silence as a final answer. Sabalenka didn't steal anything. The WTA built a system that rewarded the already rewarded while obscuring the criteria that should have elevated the overlooked. Alex Eala found that system's paper trail, presented it publicly, and forced an institution to examine its own architecture under the kind of scrutiny it had successfully avoided for years. The money may or may not have been recovered. The transparency structure was, and that is the victory that outlasts every financial figure in this story. If this video revealed something about professional tennis that nobody else is discussing at this depth, subscribe immediately. Every single week, we excavate the stories beneath the surface of official statements and prize money tables. The next chapter is already happening. You cannot afford to miss it.